All right, so you've managed to get lean, but now you're on poverty calories and you're absolutely petrified of eating more out of the fear of losing all that hard-earned progress. Not to worry though. In this video, I'm going to walk you through the step-by-step process to ensure that you maintain the physique that you've worked incredibly hard to acquire. So grab yourself a pen and a piece of paper and be ready, because we're going to dissect this bit by bit to extrapolate a blueprint that literally anyone can follow. Now, before we dive into it, it is important to mention one thing, and that is, although you will be able to eat more than you are currently eating at the end of your dieting phase, there is no guarantee that you'll be able to eat the same as, say, your friend of a similar stature, same height, same weight, who might be eating an astronomical amount of food, because the reality is individual variance is a thing. And although human metabolism is incredibly plastic, flexible, and adaptive in nature, and we can manipulate it to a degree, there is a ceiling to that. And the height of said ceiling varies to some degree from person to person. In fact, the variance can actually be quite dramatic, and there's actually some fascinating research on this exact matter to back this point up. For example, in a controlled overfeeding study by Johannesson and colleagues, participants were fed 40% above their maintenance calories for up to 8 weeks. Now, you'd expect everyone to gain a predictable amount of weight, right? But what actually happened was much more nuanced than that. Some individuals gained significantly less than predicted, while others gained significantly more. And in rare cases, there were a few participants that in fact lost weight despite eating 40% more total calories per day. When the researchers looked at the 24-hour energy expenditure, they found a huge individual discrepancy, differences of up to 500 calories per day either way, between the most and least metabolically adaptive participants in the study. That's enough to completely negate and offset a moderate calorie surplus. This kind of response is sometimes referred to as the spendthrift versus thrifty phenotypes. Spendthrifts ramp up thermogenesis and spontaneous activity when overfed, effectively burning off a good chunk of their surplus. Thrifty types, however, on the other hand, reduce movement and store more of the excess calories consumed. Another study by Mueller and colleagues found that after just 14 days of overfeeding, adaptive thermogenesis varied by over 250 calories per day, even after controlling for fat-free mass. Some people's resting metabolic rate barely changed, whereas others saw a significant bump. So what this tells us is that caloric surplus doesn't affect everyone equally. You might increase your food intake, say for example post-diet, and maintain your weight. Or if you're unlucky, you might gain more than expected, depending on how your metabolism adapts for you. So if you've ever felt like you can get away with more food, or say the opposite, where every extra bite seems to stick, that's not just in your head. There's actual literal data backing that up. Here's a graph, I'll put it up, from the Johannesson paper so you can see the scattered dots and how scattered they are. That right there is individual variability in energy expenditure. It's not tight at all. As you can see, it just shows how unpredictable this stuff can really be. Now, this brings up an important question. How do we strategically increase calories after a diet without just basically getting fat as fuck? This is where reverse dieting or metabolic recovery come into play. But while the idea is pretty popular in the fitness community, it's often misunderstood still. So let's dissect it a little bit. So what happens to the metabolism during a dieting phase? Well, when you're in a calorie deficit, your metabolism adapts downward in several key ways. First one being your basal metabolic rate, or resting metabolic rate, RMR for short. It decreases by about 10 to 15%. Secondly, your non-exercise activity thermogenesis, otherwise known as NEAT, drops because you subconsciously start moving less due to less calories coming in. Then there is the thermic effect of food, or TEF, and that simply just goes down because you're eating less food. And in some cases, exercise efficiency also increases, meaning that you burn fewer calories per hour while doing the same amount of physical activity and the same type of physical activity that you were doing prior to the dieting phase. Combine all of these adaptations can reduce a total daily energy expenditure by up to 400 to 500 calories per day in some individuals after weight loss, depending on how aggressive and prolonged the deficit was. And that's been relatively modest. It could even be a little bit more than that. This is part of what's known as adaptive thermogenesis. So that segues into reverse dieting quite nicely. How reverse dieting works and basically what the science says. So the idea behind reverse dieting is to gradually up titrate calories over time and to replenish your hormonal health, energy levels, restore normal metabolic function, your normal metabolic rate and minimize fat gain in the process. In practice, this might mean adding, say, 50 or 150 calories per week at a time, usually in the form of carbohydrates and or fats, but preferably carbohydrates, and observing the body's response. But here's the nuance. There's currently limited direct evidence on reverse dieting in the literature. Most of what we know comes from the physiology of metabolic adaptation and the anecdotal findings and data from coaches and athletes over the years. That said though, studies like the Biggest Loser follow-up study in 2016 by Fothergill and colleagues found that even 6 years after dramatic weight loss occurred, metabolic rate still remained suppressed, suggesting that metabolic recovery isn't always automatic. So what should you do? That's the real question, right? Well, here's a practical evidence-informed approach based on what we do currently know. Step number 1, determine your current total daily energy expenditure. Use your body weight trend and calorie intake over a couple of weeks to calculate your maintenance dose. Don't just use a calculator estimate. They are heavily variable and inaccurate. Step 2, increase your calories conservatively. Start with a modest 5% calorie bump to your total daily calories, which will equate to about 100-150 calories for some people, and hold that for about 1 to 2 weeks. The third step is track your weight, your hunger, training performance, libido, and mood. And if weight remains stable and all of those other markers improve, then you can increase again. It's as simple as that. The fourth point I want to make is emphasize carbohydrates, as they have the biggest impact on thyroid hormone, T3, leptin, and non-exercise activity thermogenesis. They're also protein sparing, which helps preserve lean mass. Step 5 is to adjust based on your phenotype. If you're more of a thrifty, gain fat easily, go slower. Whereas if you're more of a spendthrift, then you might tolerate larger jumps in calories. The key takeaway though is that metabolism is not static, and your response to food, especially after a dieting phase, is highly individual. Some people ramp up energy expenditure with more calories, others don't. That's why a templated plan doesn't always work. Instead, treat reverse dieting as more of a feedback loop, not a fixed protocol. You provide the stimulus, then observe and adapt based on how your body responds. If you found this breakdown helpful, guys, I would really appreciate it if you give the video a thumbs up, like the video, subscribe to the channel for more future content. It helps more than you realize. And if you want another topic of interest covered, leave a comment down below letting me know what it is, and I'll do my best to make it happen. Thanks for watching, guys. Peace out.